All right, welcome to Lesson 3, Loops. Loops are features of code that allows us to loop certain pieces of code to do things over. And I'll show you how that works, show you how that looks. So I've got a Atom file open. This is just the bare bones HTML with a script tag. Go ahead and copy that and we can get started. Okay, so there are 3 types of loops: the do while loop, the while loop, and the for loop. I almost exclusively use the for loop. I don't know if I've ever used the do while loop in a program, and I have used the while loop, but very little. So let me show you how they look. So what I'm suggesting there is you don't need to use all 3. So we need to start with a variable. We are going to build a do while loop. Let count equal 1, and then do curly braces. Let's console log count. And then underneath that, we are going to increment count. We'll say count equals count plus 1. So what we're saying there, if that looks confusing, is add 1 to whatever count used to be, and then assign that number to count. So if count starts as 1, then down here, this will say add 1 to 1, which is 2, and assign that to count. So that means every time we go through this loop, count will increase by 1. Now, here's a shortcut way of writing that line you will see all the time. And it looks like this: count plus plus. And that means increment count by 1. So that's just a shortcut. Okay? And then down here at the bottom of the do while loop, we have to run a test. We have to test the value of count. We have to say, as long as count is, let's say, less than 10, we will do this. As long as count, this bottom line says, as long as count is less than 10, we'll run this loop. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. I'm going to save that and open it here. We need to open our console log, so view, developer, JavaScript console, and there you see console log output 1 through 9. Okay, so what happened is once it got to 10, it said, okay, we're not running the next loop because count is now not less than 10, so it stopped running that loop. Okay? So notice this. Let's say count equals 10. Save that, and let's run that. I get an output of 10. What just happened there? So let's go through it. Count equals 10, and we're saying do console log count, which is 10, then add 1 to 10, and then test it. While count is less than 10, well, count was never less than 10, it was 10, but it ran that 1 output anyway. Okay? That's an important feature of the do while loop. It always runs at least once because it tests the value at the end of the loop. Okay? and that is different than the while loop. Let's see what the while loop looks like. Let's start with a variable, count equals 1, just as before, and we'll say while count is less than 10. Let me get a space in there. Console log count. And then we need to increment. Let's see what that looks like. Save that. And so it gives us 1 through 9, like the original do while did. Okay. So if I start count at 10, what's going to happen? Save, reload it. It outputs nothing. And the reason is because it count equals 10, it tests count here, and it says while count is less than 10, then run the loop. Well, count is not less than 10, so it doesn't run the loop at all. Doesn't even run it once. Okay? So that's how while and do while are different. Do while runs at least once. Okay, so now for loop. A for loop is essentially just like a while loop. It's just formatted differently. So we say something like this: for let count equal 1, count less than 10, count increment. Console log count. Let's test that. And we get the same output. Okay, so they all pretty much work the same, except the do while runs at least once. But let me show you what this for loop is doing here. The for loop, again, is like the while loop. So this first little piece before the semicolon, let count equal 1, all we're saying there is start count at 1. Start count with the value of 1. So once this thing starts, we're done with that part of the for loop. It only looks at that once. Start at 1. Then here's the test. Is count less than 10? If so, console log count. And then count plus plus, increment count. Okay? So it tests here, is count less than 10? If so, run the body of the for loop, console log count. And then go back here and increment it. Okay? So one thing I like to show you here is we don't have to increment by 1. We can increment by any number we want. I mean, we can change any of these numbers, right? We can start with any number we want. We can go to any number we want. And we can increment by any number we want. So instead of count plus plus, I could do something like count equals count plus, whoops, kapunt, plus 2. Let's give it a space there, make it look better. Let's see what that looks like. So there we go. We start at 1, we add 2, we get 3, we add 2, we add 2, we add 2. Okay? So we're incrementing by 2 there. All right? Okay, there's one thing I forgot to mention about the while loop. So I'm going to go ahead and just write it over. Okay, so what would happen if this line count plus plus or increment count, what would happen if we forgot that? Well, I'm not going to run it without it, and I'll tell you why. We'll go through it. We'll go through it line by line. Let count equal 1 while count is less than 10, console log. Okay, let's do it. Count equals 1. So while count is less than 10, is count less than 10? Yes, it's 1. So console log 1. Okay, so now it's not incrementing. Count is still equals 1. So it goes back up and says, while count is less than 10, run the loop again. Console log count. Well, count is still 1. So what happens? It just keeps running. It runs forever. It runs in what's called an infinite loop. And I'm not going to run it because it locks up the computer. It just keeps running and running. It'll run thousands and thousands of times. So I'm not going to do it because it will lock up the computer. But I want you to be aware of that. You need to increment that. You need to, at some point, exit the while loop, unless you just want it to keep running, which in many cases is not a good idea. Okay, so that's the infinite loop. Another thing I wanted to show you is you may have noticed up here I've got some gray letters, and they are preceded by 2 forward slashes. Whoops. That is a comment. Anytime you put 2 forward slashes and then a bunch of text, that's called a comment. Those are basically my own notes, and the JavaScript totally ignores comments. In other words, it doesn't process them as code. It just, they're my personal notes, and they are essentially not code, and it just totally ignores them. So if you want to write notes to yourself, that's how you do it. If you want to write a multi-line note, you would do something like this. Well, I keep doing that. You start with /*, and then you might say, hey, here is some notes and more. So you can keep writing several lines, and then the way you close out that comment is you do */, and then you can write some regular code like let count equal 0. Okay? So in other words, watch this. If I grab this variable statement and paste it inside the comment, it's gray. It's become a comment, and now it's ignored. Okay? So single line comments, multi-line comments. Okay? Anything else? I don't think so. Not for this. Just another side note. I want you to be patient while you're doing this. What you're doing here is learning the basics. You're learning some basic tools in order to build more complex and interesting programs. And we're just going through the basics right now. So be patient, learn the basics, and very soon we'll be building some more complex programs, and they'll be a lot more fun, and they'll be interesting. So thanks for joining me. See you next time.